Take my hand. I'll lead you into death. By a Whisper in the Shadows, on AO3. Episode 25. Chapter 14. Getting Izuku up the next morning was a challenge. He wasn't exactly present as Katsuki maneuvered him to get ready, practically dressing the boy and pulling apart his dumb, soft curls that Katsuki seriously needed to get cut. By the time they were leaving the room, he seemed fractionally more awake, even if it was only to latch onto Katsuki as he dragged him from the safety of his bedroom. Despite the amount of time it took to get him and Izuku to leave, they were still the first downstairs, which Katsuki was grateful for, especially since the boy had decided to be extra clinging that day, a part of him always holding Katsuki, even while he cooked. He wasn't talking much, which was fine, and not altogether unusual, but he kept zoning out, a glaze over his eyes. Every now and then, Katsuki found himself pulling at Izuku, or asking him something with slight force to get his mind back on track. It was vastly different from the observant eyes they had come to know. His attention didn't even stray to the early risers as they flowed into the room, focusing solely on the food he ate, or at least the food Katsuki continued to encourage him to eat. Most, who came down, didn't say anything. Four Eyes and Ponytails gave polite good mornings. They had stopped the glaring, though, which was positive, giving confused and curious glances every now and then instead. Katsuki just prayed all his class would be like that. President Mike had popped in briefly, only to inform Katsuki that Aizawa was in a meeting, and so would meet them in class. He also said he was technically supposed to stay around as supervisor, but thought it wasn't necessary. Katsuki was glad his teachers had faith in both him and Izuku. He was also glad his louder teacher had come to them. His appearance seemed to alert Izuku a little more. Katsuki had to hide his own smile when he saw the tiny one playing on Katsuki's lips as the cockatoo ruffled his hair, the boy leaning into his touch. Surprisingly, Kirishima was one of the early risers that morning, shuffling into the kitchen with sluggish limbs and tired eyes. Katsuki watched as he emerged again with breakfast, then hesitated as to where to sit. Rolling his eyes, the blonde gestured to the seat on the other side of Izuku. Kirishima gave him a tired smile, plumping next to the smaller boy as quietly as possible. The noise still startled Izuku a little, which meant he was more aware, so Katsuki didn't let it bother him, especially after watching the boy tense melt slightly as seeing who sat down. Katsuki chose not to comment on the redhead's unusual early rise, instead merely giving him a grateful nod as they encouraged in small conversation. Slowly, more of their classmates filtered down to the common area. Again, most chose to give the trio a wide berth, some giving a small good morning and greeting. At one point, Izuku decided to make himself comfortable sitting across from them. He didn't say much, answering Shitty Hair's questions occasionally, but Izuku did stare at him for a while. Eventually, Katsuki had to encourage the boy's hold over to Kirishima. It took a bit of coaxing and a little demonstration of Shitty Hair's quirk, which had Izuku's eyes widening fractionally, focused alert. With quiet words, Katsuki promised he'd be back quickly. He felt Izuku's gaze, even when he was out of sight. Coming back downstairs, refreshed and with Izuku's bathroom things and his notebook in tow, Katsuki was pleasantly surprised to find out everything still intact. Isehat and Shitty Hair were still the only ones right next to Izuku, but part of Katsuki felt warm at the sight of Pinky and Floaty just behind them, the rest of his squad, still gross, including eye bags on the other side of the girl's table. The closer he got, the more he noticed Izuku's tight grip on Kirishima's hand, and how he slightly shook in his seat. Though there weren't many more near him, the rest of the class has steadily made their way down while he was gone, the amount of people not helping Izuku's nerves. Kirishima was talking lowly to Izuku, laughing lightly as the hand, not gripping his own, began wandering, pulling at his PE uniform and hair. Katsuki snorted at the boy's antics, which alerted Izuku to his presence. He barely had a second's notice before the boy was finding himself at Katsuki, a startled yelp flying from him as he barely managed to stay on his feet. The movement and noise startled many of their classmates, but Katsuki ignored their chatters, and some laughter from his idiots, focusing on Izuku. "Told you I'd be quick, idiot," he whispered. He seriously needed to get his reputation back on track, but Izuku was making it so fucking difficult. Izuku released his hold on Katsuki, pulling at his back towards Shitty-Hair. Then, he pulled at Shitty-Hair's top and his own. Katsuki raised an eyebrow in question. The same. Katsuki barked a laugh, pulling Izuku to finish with getting the boy ready so they could go to class, leaving a baffled Kirishima and the rest of the extras behind. Yeah, Zuzu, we're fucking magic. The first thing Shouta did when he walked into the training grounds was seek out a head of green. He didn't have to go far. Bakugou and Izuku standing close to the main door, a little away from the classmates. Shouta was glad to see the other boy alert, even if it was to watch the space and people in wary. From what Hizashi and Bakugou had said, that was an improvement from that morning, and miles better from the night before. He did notice that Izuku was in a touchy mood, fingers clenching and unclenching by his side, standing next to Shouta while Bakugou had to train. Not wanting to force any contact, Shouta let his end of his scarf hang out to his side as an encouragement. It was finally grabbed, Izuku playing with the end of it, when Yagi came in, his small form doing nothing to ease the tension in Izuku at the newcomer. He hid in his scarf to hide his smile, glaring at Bakugou when he gave him knowing eyes. When some giggles started, he waved his hand at his irritated students, telling them to begin their sparring. When the fighting began, he felt Izuku physically flinch by his side, stepping further away from the training mats. His breath hitched, hands gripping Shota's scarf, harshly. Wide eyes flew widely around the room, then froze on a certain pair. Bakugou and Kirishima, obviously to the fear they were creating, continued to savagely pound at one another, both grinning dangerously. Izuku. Shouta whispered cautiously. He got no response, the boy continuing to stare. Carefully, he placed himself in front of the boy's eye line, back to this class. Izuku, he said again, with a little more force. The boy blinked rapidly, finally focusing on Shouta in front of him. He let out a breath, trying to look past Shouta, but the teacher moved in front of him again. Hey, kid, it's just training, he explained, forcing his voice to be gentle. Remember what we talked about? We talked about heroes and how Bakugou's becoming one? Izuku, remember? He asked, attempting to encourage the attention solely on him. Izuku looked at the ground, then nodded quickly. Shouta hummed, reaching out his own hand slowly to ruffle the kid's hair, but stopped just before, dropping it to his side again. See? It's not real, okay? I might get a little hurt sometimes, but we have people to take care of them. You don't have to worry, alright? He could see the hesitation, the thoughts running wild in Izuku's head before he gave a small nod. Shouta smirked. Good. Now take out that notebook. I believe Bakugou gave it to you for a reason. Bakugou had in fact gotten Izuku's notebook for a reason, though he hadn't told Shouta why. As they moved around the room, however, watching how his students sparred, how they utilized their quirks, Shouta began to understand. Izuku was brilliant. They had worried at first that the boy wouldn't be up to scratch in his education, which was true for the most part. Shouta had gone over a number of things with him while they were in the hospital. Bakugou did most of the work at the time. It's still shocking how much Izuku had come to trust them, even a little, over a number of days. It really made Shouta wonder about his life before, constantly having him tossed and turned over. Even so, his natural intelligence was astounding. The way he picked up on things and situations, and his surroundings. Then there were his thoughts on quirks. It had confused Shouta at first, especially when introducing Izuku to the staff, how the boy had so much to say on them. Nem, he especially focused on, not allowing her too close. He understood her abilities, like he did Hitoshi's. He understood what she could do, and how she could harm him. Clearly, whatever he was before, whoever this Papa was, hadn't shut him out entirely from the world. When he had instantly said Nomori's hero name, she walked in, whispering as if warning to himself. Shouta understood. This was how he was trained, to assess his surroundings, his targets, to know what he could use and what could be used against him. It didn't make his abilities to analyze quirks any less impressive. Even from the quick glances at Izuku's notes, Shouta knew he'd be able to borrow them later. His feline interest was fascinating to witness. Impressive, isn't it? An out-of-breath voice sounded from beside him, glancing at the panting Bakugou and Kirishima, Shouta hummed in agreement. How'd you know? Shouta asked before elaborating at Bakugou's confused expression. That he'd be able to look at quirks like this? That he enjoy it so much? Bakugou stared at him in bewilderment. Shouta's question not registering properly himself immediately. After a moment, however, his eyes widened in understanding, and he barked a laugh. Oh, Zuzu? He's been analyzing quirks long before he was taken. Pretty sure his first notebook is full of crayons and gibberish. An unusual soft smile crossed his lips, though Shouta supposed not so unusual when it came to Izuku. A cheer from All Might in his enlarged form spoke to Kaminari and Ojiro. It brought Shouta out of his thoughts, as they all glanced at him. He dwelled on Izuku's mind later. He still had a class to teach. Well, that's fucking interesting. Shouta turned to Bakugou again at his voice, but he was still watching Izuku. Glancing over, he saw that Izuku had frozen at what he was writing, gripping his pen hard as he stared at the large man. At first, Shouta thought he was scared, but upon further examination, as he approached Izuku, he realized his eyes were wide with something else. Something akin to wonder. Something close to how he sometimes looked at Bakugou, but not quite there. Interesting is right. By the end of training class, Izuku was buzzing. Their teacher had taken the students for the first half of the day, and lunch was approaching, but it didn't seem to dull his excitement. Though he wasn't obvious about it, Katsuki could tell. He could also tell the younger boy had questions. Many questions that were ready on the tip of his tongue, but that he wouldn't ask. When he went over to Izuku, he tapped his notebook and quietly told him to write them down. It barely took him a second to comply. Watching the boy's work, Katsuki sweatily, and still panting, deliberated his next move. Then he smirked to himself. Izuku. The boy looked up at Katsuki, opening his arms. Hug. Izuku stared at him for a long moment, before scrunching his nose slightly and shaking his head, going back to writing. Katsuki gaped at him, flipping off his friends as the crackle came behind him. Izuku glanced at Katsuki's friends, then up at him again. Sweaty. Gross. He stated simply. Katsuki growled, yanking the boy's face into his chest as he messed with his curls. He barked a laugh at Izuku's protesting whine, making a mess of him further, ignoring the curious eyes on them. A door behind them slammed open, drawing the class's attention away from the two boys. Katsuki saw the flurry of white hair and blur of pink as Eri raced into the room, followed by a frazzled-looking Mike. She ignored the greeting she got, much to the class' dismay. They all competed so hard to be her favorite. None won against Katsuki, except maybe Shinsou. Maybe. Her eyes darted around the room until she landed on her target. Eri incoming, he whispered in warning. Izuku perked up, wiggling out of Katsuki's embrace. Eri smiled widely and came bouncing over to them, an excited giggle flowing freely. Katsuki readied himself for impact. But it never came. Zuzu! She squealed, jumping onto the unsuspecting boy's arms, whose eyes widened comedically as he flared to catch her. Katsuki stared at them, open mouth as Eri began rumbling wildly about her school day was. It was cut short because some kid lost control of their quirk and flooded the place, but it was okay because she got to come and see Zuzu. Looks like Kitty's no longer the favorite. Sparky sang, laughing with his friends. Shut up, Pikachu! Katsuki yelled back, as he turned to give his dumb friends a piece of his mind. His steps faltered. His classmates' eyes had been on them all day, on Izuku all day. But this was different. This wasn't out of nerves or fear or anger. This wasn't even curiosity. It wasn't a secret that Eri was a little sister to each of them. They loved her so much, they would do anything to keep her safe. And here she was, their angel, bundled in the arms of a deadly assassin. A villain, looking at him like he hung the moon and stars, seeing him look at her in the exact same way. The look they were giving Izuku in that moment was one to wonder. It was one that Katsuki knew would have them in their beds that night, tossing and turning. It was one he thought of hours later on as he cleaned the kitchen, waiting for Izuku to return with Aizawa from a meeting with Nezu and the other teachers. He wanted to go, but Aizawa refused, saying it was private and that it wasn't a good chance for Izuku to learn the place without him. Places he'd probably want Katsuki's comfort the most. He hated it, but he knew the hobo was right. Bakugou? He turned to Ear's voice, only to heart his movements. Almost the whole class stood behind him, crowded just outside the kitchen despite the small space. He could see his little group of hovering past them. Uraraka and Todoroki there as well, along with Ida, which Katsuki was a little surprised by. He grunted, waving at her to continue. It was Ponytail who spoke next. "We're sorry," she whispered, and that shocked him. "We know we don't know Midoriya, or his story, and we know we've been harsh judges. For that, we are truly sorry." Katsuki put his washing, turned to give them his full attention. "But," she continued, "you cannot blame us for being afraid. Midoriya he's an enigma, and we can't crack him. The unknown itself makes us nervous, but then there's his history as Reaper and all of our past experiences with villains." She cut herself off, breathing deeply before continuing. "We just want you to know that we'll try. We'll try, but this isn't going to be something that won't disappear overnight. We knew him as a killer first. We were told to fear him. That's going to take time to change. To get rid of that fear. He targeted you. It was like deja vu, and it scared us all. But we will try." She smiled at him. "Plus Ultra, right?" Katsuki stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed heavily. "I'm not fucking mad at you extras or whatever you think. Izuku is... him and me is something you will probably never understand. And I don't fucking expect you to. I get the fear. I get it." Yaoyorozu's smile was soft. "We care a lot about you, you know?" Katsuki bristled at her affectionate tone, grumbling. Yeah, I care about you fucking idiots too, or whatever." He murmured, waving them off. A few laughs were heard as they dispersed. "Thanks," he whispered as an afterthought. "Aw, Blasty's getting all soft on us." Someone jeered. An uproar of laughter and explosions followed it. "Fucking fuck off, fuckwads." There was something bristling in Izuku's chest. Something he couldn't quite understand. He felt it most when he was with Kacchan. Again with Eri, Yamada, and Aizawa. Gave him the feeling too. It wasn't as strong, but it was there. The same with Kirishima and some of other Kacchan's friends. He felt it a lot that day at different moments. Especially with Kacchan. Always with Kacchan. And then with Eri. But there were the quirks. Watching all the different quirks, all the sparring, this buzzing ran along him. Izuku didn't understand it. That didn't mean he didn't like it. It scared him a little. It was unfamiliar, and that was often daunting. Often didn't end well. It was unfamiliar, but not unknown. He felt it when he was little when he saw the green woman. His mother. He don't remember her, but she wasn't unknown. There was something there. Then he felt it with the large man. All Might. He wasn't sure about him. But then he changed shapes. And then there was that feeling. Not like with Kacchan and Eri or Yamada and Aizawa or the friends. This was something tingling. As he fell asleep in a warm embrace, starlight twinkling around the dark room, Carmel showering his senses, he felt that buzzing. A song came to mind, different from his lullaby. Izuku hummed himself to sleep. Okay. I loved every second of that. I actually loved every second of that. That was so cute. That was so adorable. Honest to God. It was just chef's kiss. I loved it. I loved it a lot. Okay. I very much loved it. It was really interesting. I really like to see the progression of Izuku and the class and how they're viewing him differently now, especially with everything that's happened and stuff. So I'm really interested in seeing that and how that's being developed, I guess. So I loved everything of that. I'm glad that everything's sorted out. I'm glad that Izuku has some sort of light in his room. I'm guessing that's his room, unless it's Katsuki's room. It's really good. I really loved it. I loved how they're warming up to Izuku. I like the moment. I like to think that the moment the class really fully understood is when Eri ran up to Izuku and they both looked at each other happily. Maybe consciously they didn't think about this. Maybe some of them did. But as I said before, trauma bonding, a lot of the times, I mean, the whole class is trauma bonded. You can't tell me that. So when they see someone who they know has a really dark past look at someone else with those sparkle in their eyes, and that other person look at her with the same sparkles, and look at each other, and you could see that sense of, okay, he seems to really care for this person, and maybe subconsciously they link the two of them. They know Aries had a really bad past, and they could only imagine Izuku's had a bad past, especially considering how he had a whole panic attack because it was dark. Also, I want to touch upon that. It going dark and Izuku regressing. That is called regression. And I don't mean it as the coping mechanism regression. I mean it in the healing sense regression. That is a step back. He has a trigger. That is one of his triggers. I would arguably say that Izuku's probably going to have PTSD. There's no way he's going to come out of this fully unscathed. Izuku's going to have some sort of PTSD. There's no way he's not. He's going to, what's it called? He's going to feel the regression. He's going to have those panic attacks. And in that moment, he goes back. That is literally textbook definition of flashbacks, right? Obviously, or a type of episode when it comes to PTSD, including the lashing out, right? In those episodes and stuff like that. Like, I'm telling you, Izuku is definitely not mentally okay. And Izuku's definitely going through a lot. And during those moments, Izuku genuinely, his mind goes back there. When you have PTSD, you genuinely, during those episodes, your mind, your emotions that you're feeling could go back there. You could feel as though you are back, right? And Izuku would definitely not just have regular PTSD. He would have complex PTSD, CPTSD, which is, you know, the only change is like, what's it called? How one gets it and stuff like that. But PTSD is hard. It is really hard on the mind, on the body, on the psyche. And obviously, Izuku has these moments, these episodes, I guess you would call them, where he genuinely thinks he's back in there, which I really like those thoughts. I also have noticed that there's going to be a type of alignment. So we're going to start with somebody's point of view, and at the end we will always have an Izuku point of view or someone else's point of view. There will always be 2 points of view in every chapter. I have not seen a fully Izuku point of view. This seems to be leaning more as Aizawa point of view or Katsuki point of view, with occasional Izuku point of view in there. So while this is a story heavily focused on Izuku and his growth and him growing and all that stuff, I definitely think that the quote-unquote main characters are definitely Aizawa or Katsuki, with Izuku being a supporting cast in the sense of he does not get as much point of view time in that sense, you know? So that's all I have to say. So as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.